personal reasons.
Ah.
Yeah, that's sort of what's... No, anyway, I will look to getting a third guy in on this, especially now that I'm hosting it. What? Raise the roof. I am... But I will try to get a third guy so it's not just echo chamber here with me and StallordD. We have another third opinion here, another third voice. And hopefully it'll bring us something that's new to it. Anyway, tonight we are discussing the Tenno clans of the Orokin Era. The ones that have been consistently hinted at by DE themselves and are named in the polarities of our warframes and weapons. As well as our mods, of course. Most recently, and if I could pull that up real fast, if it's at all being able to pick up the visual on stream, most recently in DevStream 55, we were also shown that the names also correspond to the map of the galaxy. Perhaps as the Orokin saw it, or perhaps just as Tenno mapped it up for strategic reasons, as they seem to hint at in the stream. Still, do you have any input on any of this so far?
Yeah, I didn't think that's a good point that the Tenno have their own jurisdiction, you know, beyond, because that's something that I think that I've always liked that not a lot of people seem to agree on, which I think is unfortunate, is that the Tenno have their own like culture and ideals outside of the Orokin. Like they were underneath the Orokin in terms of you know, being dominated by them, I suppose you could say, but they still had their own personal beliefs. They weren't just soldiers. They were their very own unique race, which I think is a cool feature.
And I very much agree with that. The counterpoint to that I see getting brought up consistently when people bring that up and try to say, no, can't be like that, is that the Orokin wouldn't have let them do that under their guy. They would just try to keep them as soldiers to kind of crush and squelch these uprisings of individuality between all of them, which makes sense, especially what we've seen happen with like the sentients before. But at the same time, they just can't. It's not feasible for them to be able to do that, especially now that we know their guide, the Big Lotus, has no ties to the Orokin. I'm just not seeing where they'd actually be able to stick their fingers into the Tenno and try to dictate what they thought and what they didn't think. It was very clear that, at least, not initially, but over time, the Tenno would take on their own culture, their own clans. And that is sort of where it comes down to with whether or not the map we have is Orokin or purely Tenno. Because a lot in how...
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that with the Orokin, you know, dominating the Tenno, they might have been more than willing to let the Tenno kind of hype themselves up, so to speak. Like say, oh hey, these guys are becoming even more, you know, warrior dictated and even more of like a central idea that they have to be warriors. Why don't we just let them do their own thing and they'll go on that? No need to interfere.
That is true, yes. That makes sense, because if they are just making themselves more and more warriors, generally a warrior is subservient to some greater thing. Or at least that might have been their sort of idea going in. As they were warriors, but they still served the Orokin. As long as they kept the sentience at bay and finished up this whole old war business, it was all okay. As I was saying, though, when it comes to whether or not this was mapped out by the Tenno or the Orokin or not, I personally want to lean towards what we have from DevStream 55, barring, of course, the placeholders they talked about with the dragon and all that, is the Orokin version of it. And the Tenno took the names for their various clans from where they were stationed in that sector. And, of course, that also corresponds to, at least in some regards, the purpose and whatnot of those various districts, I guess. I wrote some notes. Regions, yeah. I don't know. I'm still trying to work out all of the terminology and whatnot. You have the system, then you have sectors that are like different areas, or the like subsystems, whatever. On point though, I've mailed you some of those just so you would have sort of an idea of what the names of them were. But I have sort of thoughts listed out on the various districts, areas, or whatever, and how their names might relate to the various clans. Sort of trying to tie together the locations of those areas in the system as we understand it in reality, because I think we could all sort of agree that Nerimon cores and Nerf fields, this probably isn't exactly how the system is laid out. You don't have all these things in nice little clusters moved over and over and like that. They probably...
No.
They probably...
And I was just going to say, in a later version of the star chart, they showed that it is a lot more
oh, they have a later version of it?
Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. I don't remember what stream it is, but Steve sits down and it shows that they are in kind of more natural-looking regions of the system, as opposed to these nice big blocks.
Okay, well that's... I wish I had known that existed. I don't know how I forgot about that. I'll look for it afterwards and throw it up in the stream or something like that. But yeah, so yeah, it's very not much about all that. It's just sort of how they were laid out. Sort of starting off from my notes, though, the first thing I wrote down is about the Varzine Expanse, which apparently is that whole asteroid belt sort of area, with Ceres and whatnot being in it. So my thoughts on that were generally, this is like the surrounding point for the center of the universe. This is basically what we think, the whole asteroid belt is basically what we use to separate the inner solar system from the outer solar system. Mars and all that inside, Jupiter and everything else outside. And this makes sense from a, I don't know, some kind of sci-fi tactical perspective to be the defending point to stop things from getting into that inner solar system, which makes sense to be the, like the colonization spots of the Orokin Empire. Like Steve said during the Division 55, Mars and Phobos and whatnot were sort of the population centers of the Orokin. So generally... oh, go on.
I was just... I'd see them as the survivalists of the Tenno, the kind of the secretive but the steadfast ones who stand at the edge and are prepared for anything that would come to them. They're not so focused on maybe going out and dealing with threats, but they're the ones who definitely stay close to home. The Frosts and the Rhinos and that.
Aye, and that's another thing I also kind of tack up on. The various sort of polarities that are tied to the Warframes kind of maybe hint at what clans sort of favored them. So like Warframe, not exactly which clans solely use them, but the ones that sort of had a more interest in them. And of course that makes sense, like you said, Rhino and Frost, they have double D-bubble Vizarian polarities, and so that's a more defensive stance, compared to like Nova, who is very much more in line with the, I think it's the Madurai? Yeah, the Madurai.
Yeah, the Madurai.
We'll get to them later, because I don't yet think they are on the chart there. So, yes, and I see the Vizarian very much in the same way. They're the defenders, they're the protectors, they're the first line, they're the shield that stops the enemies from getting past them, getting to whatever they're assigned to protect. And again, it was the Riders and whatnot. And it makes sense that the Tenno that were assigned to do this, and that would make up the Vizarian clan later, would become these assigned to do this and be the protectors, would take on the name of the area which they're sent to defend the system from. Again, that big great tactical advantage point, the asteroid belt and whatnot, the Vizarian Expanse. Perhaps there's also something to be said for the fact that the first Tenno dojos are there, or at least the Tenno dojos of today are... get with the earbuds! But perhaps there's something to be said for the fact of the Tenno dojos being there and tied to that, but I don't know, it kind of feel more like Naramon and whatnot would be the place for the dojos, but on Naramon, the Naramon core, the Naramon mods being your utility powers, your efficiencies, things like that. Sort of they're not just utility mods now, but they have
Mostly.
yeah, a lot of them are utility mods, but they have this sort of, it's not defensive, it's not aggressive, it's just sort of quality of life. To coin a phrase, use the phrase that's been
Hmm.
coined.
To me, the Neramon struck me as kind of the tacticians and the scholars of the Tenno. They were more focused on like being adequately prepared for anything
That
that
makes
they would
sense.
go find. And they had and this is all my fan fiction, but they have a pretty close tie with the Vazarin in being focused on adequate preparation, but instead of waiting for things to come, they go out and find them, which is why things like Rush exist under the Neramon.
Potentially. Yeah, I never thought about the whole like rush and all that, and especially with mobility and things like that that have now been introduced. Them sort of being the ones to go out and find the guys. To me, that's more the
Hmm.
Madurai, but for a completely different reason.
Yeah.
Just sort of my general thoughts. I don't have much on these guys compared to some of the others, but I like to think of them as having been like the first Tenno, actually. The first Tenno to be
Hmm.
outfitted with the Warframes. They're the oldest of the clans. They're sort of these ancient, wizened guys. Not relying all that much on the Force for offense and defense, but sort of, helping out along. And that, again,
I would see those as the Zenoric or the Unairu.
yeah, the Xenoric gets weird, and Unaira as well, especially given where the thing's located. But generally, my train of thought is, okay, they're here at the center of the galaxy. They're most likely closest to the Orkin. These guys might very well be the first to have ever been made.
Hmm.
You mentioned the Xenoric, though, and I don't know what to make of this.
The Zenoric strike me as the kind of the philosophers and the meditators. They're kind of, I guess you could say, starry-eyed in the Tenno. They believe in mastering the Warframe over the weapons that the Warframe wields, which is why they're, so focused on channeling the inner void energies that the Tenno have. And they're definitely the ones who are, I guess, like to put all the things, like what the clan holds closest. The Vazarin, hold defense closest. The Neramon hold tactics closest, and then the Zenoric hold the Warframe, just the Warframe itself.
Right. That makes sense. I agree completely with the use of powers of weapons and whatnot. Good use with powers of weapons and whatnot. Um, Lost my train of thought here. But I don't understand about though is why are they at the Orokin population centers? Why are these Tenno that focus on the power of the Warframe located with around like regular people and whatnot? Would it not make a bit more sense for the Vazarin to be there? Perhaps they ought to change places.
Um, Again, I think the idea for the Vazarin to be on the outmost sector, defending against the outside forces of the, beyond the system, makes sense for their position. So it is the Zenoric are at the core of the system in the star chart?
I think sort of Neramon are at the core. They were described as being the
Yeah.
Orchid populous centers. They're Mars, Venus, Earth, all that. While, oh sorry, the inner solar system. There's the Nurk, all the population centers, the Mars, the Phobos, and whatnot, which are a bit more out than the inner ones, which probably where the Oregon has their
Hmm.
palaces and whatnot.
Yeah. Maybe it's because the Zenoric were kind of, because of their focus on, like, mastering the Warframe, they were also kind of like the proselytes of the Tenno. They kind of went out there and showed how perfect the Tenno could be, like, as just a Tenno, not including, the mastery of weaponry, but just look at how perfect these pristine warriors are and their mastery over the void energies that they, command.
And
And so they kind of stood as like examples amongst the lower populace to kind of look up to.
yeah, that makes sense. It's actually something I hadn't considered, especially with the whole idea of Oro that it ties between the Tenno with the Orkin and pretty much everything else. What exactly being a Tenno might mean to everyone else in the system, whether or not they're the highest guys or low guys, they probably had some experience with Oro. Like I said in earlier streams, I think that the Lorsts are very tied to the Oro energies, from which the Empire took its name. And perhaps further backing this is a little connection I made, but when you wear the New Loka sign, Dana, it glows through use of your powers. And the New Loka are sort of these humanist guys, whether it's humanity from a philosophical sense or from a physical sense, unclear, but I wonder if there's some connection there, because I stand very much by my idea that because of the Orokin aesthetic elements that are in their room on the relay, the New Loka has some deeper tie to them, and that kind of makes sense with the whole idea of the Orokin having been these physically beautiful and perfect creatures, which we see coming through. It unfortunately does paint the New Loka as very Nazi-esque all over again, but
yeah, they get a bad rep.
They do get a very bad rep. They're up there with Red Veil on that. Yeah,
I think it'd be a cool thing if the Oro, was like, because describing the power and how the thing pulses. Maybe, all right, this is going to be kind of there's a lot of leaps involved with what this is going to be, but like it pulses as a sign of the person wearing it, being perfect humanity. Maybe Oro is something latent within every person as sort of like the ability to withstand death. Maybe it's like kind of like what we think of as luck is this Oro force.
perhaps.
And it's stronger in some people and weaker in others, and that's why the New Loka sees Tenno as so majestic, is because they have these fully formed Oro that allow them to completely withstand death.
Potentially, that's definitely thought for like a future Loreframe stream on Oro itself, because that's going to be a much bigger topic than we can possibly fit into here without getting horribly off track. So, yeah, I'll make a note of that though. The people watching the stream, I guess all three of them, I can't actually tell from this point.
2, haha.
2! I think one of them's me, so 1. Wait.
1 is me, 1 is you, and then we got Angius T and Sonatorum.
Oh, glorious. Excellent. Thank you for watching the stream. This will be up on YouTube and whatnot later, but moving on. Next on my list is the Madurai. From the Madurai sphere, which was described as being the exit point of the solar system. The whole, out there by, like, Eris, Pluto, and whatnot, the farthest of the far reaches. In particular, and to me this makes sense that the guys most geared towards offense would be located there. They're the tip of the spear. They're the go-to assault force. They're the guys that have the most damage. They're the guys who go into, after the sentients have been routed and sort of pushed back, they're sent out to follow up and invade Tau. Because even before we knew for a fact that the sentients had invaded Origin, we knew that the Tenno and the Orokin Wilds had pushed back and started to attack them in Tau itself. The system with the blue star mentioned in the Mag Codex. And that is done through the outer terminus, most likely, and whatnot. On whatever planets are there. It makes sense for these hyper-aggressive, hyper-frontal assault groups to be the ones doing that. It's, aside from the Varzin being the whole defensive thing, these guys are probably the most straightforward in how that whole principle connects, if it connects at all.
Definitely. The warriors and the weaponsmiths, pretty cut and dry with them.
Yeah, we'll get into like the weaponsmiths a bit later, because I almost feel like that might be assigned to another group, but next we have the most confusing of them all, the Unaru Volatiles, and it took me I actually had to rewatch the entire stream to figure out what the name was, because that whole little couch box is blocking the name. Yeah, but they're the Unaru Volatiles, and that is the occasional melee stance. And
I definitely think they're the masters of melee combat.
Oh, without doubt. They were the weaponsmiths. They were the guys that would train the newer Tenno so sort of bar any ideas of what Teshin and whatnot might have been in the Conclave before
Mm-hmm.
that, they would have been the guys who trained the newer Tenno in the ways of the blade. They were the guys who trained them, the masters, the combos and whatnot. They probably pioneered all of these things. Even though the majority of weapon combos don't tie into that style, I like to think that they did create them, and then the other clans sort of adopted them from there based on sort of various preferences. So they all had their origins within Unaru, but after that, and Madorai took up like a flailing branch or whatever. Malmon took up others, Varzin took up others, Zeneric, etc., etc. What I don't get is if there is like a connection, like with Varzon and Madurai, to be connected to where they are in the solar system, why is it by the gas giants and whatnot? Why is it by these super planets that would be like harvesting areas like we see today?
Maybe because of the intense climate was more of an area where they could perfect their combat or something like that. And additionally, one thing we have to consider is that these aren't final areas. They're just kind of, hinted there.
Yeah, that is very true.
It could be very easily changed.
But that is something I hadn't...
And another one... You first.
Okay, but that is something I hadn't considered. That it's just the fact that these things are massive. You have gravity playing a factor. And even for the large part, we don't see that playing a lot on the Tenno, but a lot of that is just sort of gameplay mechanics. So you had gravity affecting you more and more depending on where you were. It'd be a completely different game from when you're on Earth to when you're on Jupiter, and that'd be like a whole new balancing issue. DE probably someone to mess with. But from a lore standpoint and whatnot, this heavier gravity, it's Dragon Ball Z is what it is. You train in heavier gravity, you get stronger. You get stronger fast.
What are those, hyper chambers?
The hyperbolic time chamber, whatnot, or it's like that. No, it's the ship that they used for a while. I don't know.
Yeah.
Muffin button. So yeah, because from now we move into the final two, and these are the two that aren't represented on the Devstream 55 star chart as we saw it, and that is Penjaga, and I'm probably going to butcher this horribly, Konexi, something like that. And Penjaga they're the companion mods. They're the pretty much just mods for everything companion that doesn't fall into one of the others above. And to me, this sort of paints the Penjaga if these are clans and not just something else entirely, because it's kind of hard to tell given we have sort of this basis with the star chart and whatnot. But I think the Penjaga clan were like the kennel masters. They bred the Kubros and the Sentinels and all that, and raised them, trained them, and basically these were where the Tenno use of these started out. And that's something else I know in particular, was that I like to think that the Penjaga was an offshoot of Naramon, because they're very similar symbols, as a matter if you've ever noticed. All you have to do is take Naramon, turn it, and add a little dot to it. So
I could see that.
Yeah, it's pretty much just what you said. It's very kind of fan theory-esque, but they kind of play very similar roles. They're very more utility and not directly focused with Tenno offense and defense. It's more about this support. Go on.
They definitely struck me as the Beastmasters and the inventors of the Tenno, and I didn't think about the connections with the Naramon before, but
yeah, just something I noticed.
I like to think, I like to think of the Naramon, like as the tacticians of the Tenno, so that would make sense that an offshoot of them would be like, all right, well, what's a great way we can plan in a way the enemy wouldn't foresee by using these outside forces that they can't, they kind of don't think about. Exactly.
I mean, we have tanks and whatnot, even in the modern day, and we still have bomb-sniffing dogs and whatnot we've been using forever, just because they are efficient. They are good tools.
And we do know that Kubro were used in the by the Orokin for combat purposes, at least at some points.
And that makes sense, because we know the Orokin had their own forces as well. They had the Dax, they had the Grineer too, which, at some point, and of course they had the Corrupted. So, exactly where on sort of this greater timeline they stopped being purely Orokin and started being Tenno, for how brief that may have been, it's very unclear, but for the most, we don't really have a set timeline to begin with, so it's not really worth pondering over. Now, lastly, we have, how did I pronounce this? Konexi?
I think you said it Konski, but I definitely think it's Konexi.
Konexi, yes. And these are the fusion cores.
Yep.
And that's all they are.
They strike me as the group that was focused, like the Void Smiths, the one who studied Void to kind of get better at mastering it. They would probably be pretty closely aligned with the Zenoric in my head.
Aye. And that's
kind of trying to, perfect it.
And that's very much what I fall in line with. They were the Forge Masters and outfitters for the Tenno. They designed maybe even the weapons themselves before Unaru took them and started training and practicing with them. But they designed these things, they found ways to improve upon them. And a little note I have here is, if the regular Warframes originate post-Orokin, or pre-Orokin, or whatever. No, okay, what I'm saying is, if the regular Warframes aren't made by the Orokin, they were made by this clan, the Konexi, see, the K clan. I probably shouldn't say that ever again. Yeah, they were developed by Fusion Clan. And
yeah, there we go.
Fusion Clan. Get with the Dragon Ball Z, that seems to be a theme. So yeah, and this all just is sort of very base speculation on very little information, and I'm not even going. Apparently, I'm not even going for the most up-to-date thing we have. I'm working with an age-old, well, relatively speaking, age-old star chart here.
I wish I knew what stream the updated version came from, but it's definitely cool.
Yeah, I'll look through it. I'll look through them after this, see what I can find, and post something about that. It may have just been like the developer workshop or something as well. So, next we have, and now we're done with that, we have the fan concept of the fan theory of the week. I think I linked this to you earlier, did I? No, I don't think I did.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm going to link it in sort of chat here right now.
In TeamSpeak chat?
Yeah.
Or in, okay.
Yeah, it's right there. I've linked that to you now, and it is our Cephalon weapons, the height of Orokin technology. It's actually something that gave me a bit of pause here. Basically what Momar is saying is, I honestly didn't read this whole thing, so... We know from the Codex the Orokin Empire equipped the Tenno with the weapons of the old ways, gun and blade. Now, these weapons seem pretty darn advanced, but the choice of words seem to apply to very low tech by the standards of the day. And we even see that sort of with what they have. Even with Bratton being a Corpus remake of something like that, the Boar, the Bratton Prime, and of course all the blade and melee weapons are relatively low tech compared to future stuff, especially what we see with like the fusion mowers and whatnot, which are said to be made of Orokin technology, well, with high levels of Orokin technology.
Yeah.
So, and basically what he says is that all that the weapons we see as being Cephalon, the Grammacore and the Simular, which are the only two we have so far, might not be Cephalon originals, but rather because they're this more sort of energy style thing going on, maybe they have origins from the Orokin themselves. And to me, it's actually kind of interesting, because even with their look, they have this sort of very flowing and elegant thing. And of course, DE had a whole workshop about saying they wanted to make these look very dang it, what did they say? Kind of shellfish like horseshoe crabs and whatnot, they said. Sort of based on that kind of rough shape, but at the same time, they are still this very sort of organic and flowing type of thing. They lack the kind of pristine gold and embroidering and whatnot of the sort of Orokin designs, but these aren't Orokin handing these things out. They're Cephalons who've likely taken these and twisted them and remade them in their image. But at the same time, I still see them as having this very organic, flowing design, which you kind of see in Orokin things themselves, especially when you look at, like, the Orokin derelict ships, and the occasional Orokin ships you can see when going into the void. Take away the infested tendrils off of that thing, and it has this very sleek, smooth kind of design to it. It's... And so, the question is brought up is, perhaps this technology we have here is being used by the Cephalons was what was used at the height of the Orokin Empire, as their own weapons of choice and whatnot. This kind of classic energy weapon sort of look, which I'll admit kind of fits with the idea of these Orokin as the high-end masters of technology. And of course, I also have my own theories and whatnot on how that applies to other things we've seen, but that's for later streams once you know more facts. So I'll shut up and let you speak now.
I think that that's a good idea with the Cephalon weapons being that height of Orokin technology, but they're used the way we have them, described as in lore as scientific collection weapons and such.
Yeah.
And the Cephalons themselves, at least from from what we know from Cordelon, aren't too capable of, like, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it, like, their own personal, they're not weapons themselves, I guess you could say. They just monitor weapon systems and information. So I could definitely see those kinds of things, like, being, devolved versions of Orokin stuff. That would definitely make a lot of sense. But I think that what the Orokin had in terms of true weapons, like the really scary stuff, would have been like Exterminatus scale that we just haven't seen yet. Like, something I see a lot bomb. That gives me, the cascade bombs and stuff like that, and something I see a lot that always makes me question it. I never looked into it too deeply, but there's a huge scar on Phobos if you look at the texture of the planet, and I don't know if that's actually on the planet. Like I said, I didn't really look at it, but I think that, because I remember DE said that they did slightly alter the texts to be or the textures to be lore friendly. So if, like, there's some giant, planetary annihilation beam that was used on Phobos to, like, subdue a rebel uprising or something, that would be something cool to see in the future, perhaps.
That does make sense. Yeah. Yeah, and it does. Also, this idea of the Orokin just, nuke it from orbit. We don't even worry about this. Just wipe everything out, start over. That kind of fits with this idea of these what we kind of see with them in the crewman synthesis. These guys who are willing to go to any lengths to sort of make sure their philosophies and ideals are preserved, even if that costs them great things. Now, in the crewman synthesis, they broke down because they backed off because they realized this was sort of a final chance at saving themselves, but at the height of its power and at times when it didn't have to worry about that sort of thing, I can totally see them just wiping entire planets clean to start over.
They definitely would not be above that.
Yeah, a lot of the comments here are just saying pretty much what you've said, noting things about it. A few people do kind of agree with it, like one person, but I don't know. It is kind of a shot in the dark, and it may just be that the fact that the Cephalons are Orokin creations by themselves originally. So, yeah. I don't know. It probably is no connection. It probably is just sort of this original sort of thing going on.
The science mod, yeah.
Yes. probably is just started off as science, were changed by others into weaponry, and the Cephalons adopted it, but it's a very strange sort of design to them. It kind of gives me pause.
Yeah.
And that is literally everything I have. We probably could have spent another good 30 minutes talking about the aura when you brought it up.
Yeah, we could, you know, we could find ways to talk about whatever we wanted for literally hours if we wanted to.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Something I forgot to do at the start of the stream, but now is a good time to do it, is, you know, it's been a long time since the last stream, but I want to, between streams, you know, if anything new gets brought up, you know, pertinent to the last one we did, I think it's a good idea to bring it up. And one that I didn't even think about, that we kind of totally glossed over, and it's not super important, but it's still kind of a cool thing to notice, is that in the Lorist entry, or in the Corrupted Ancient, she mentions that New Uxmal, you know, is as old as the atmosphere on Mars.
Yes, yes.
Which to me indicates that, you know, a lot of people are like, wait, how are we on Venus and we're breathing and all that kind of stuff? It definitely, you know, settles the fact that the Orokin were able to terraform planets, and that they created the atmosphere on Mars and then erected New Uxmal afterwards.
Ah, that makes sense. And in some degree, and according to, with a few regards, I do think that doesn't excuse certain things, you know, like
yeah,
snow on Venus and whatnot. But that definitely is a good point. That definitely brings up quite a few other interesting tidbits.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely rules out something that I've seen brought up at least one other time before, that the sentients were meant to be terraformers of planets. Apparently, because clearly the Orokin could do this themselves.
True.
They had Martian atmosphere a long time before they had the sentience, because in the crewman synthesis itself, it's brought up that one of the executors speaking, has a cozy little position on Mars. So.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely sort of, if we can possibly extrapolate a lot from that, it definitely cements that the sentients were just there to build the solar rails, just to get the
and
origin.
do the terraforming.
Well, again, I don't think to do the terraforming itself. I just think that this Orokin needed to get out of Origin and into Tau within a feasible time, and for the Orokin, that's solar rails. And whatever happened to the sentients after that probably led to the Old War, but we have update 18 for that. So
yeah, hopefully, man.
God, I hope so.
I hope that comes before. We need lore, man. Come on, D. Give us that quest. Lotus dies. That's all I want.
No, honestly, on that note, the ultimate way to get people to stop saying Lotus is evil, we have to stop her, would be for her to physically put herself in harm's way to protect the Tenno, especially from her own kind. Just the whole kind of cliched but always awesome jump in front of the attack and block it with your own body sort of thing.
That would be pretty funny.
That would be awesome, especially with another sentient. I'm picturing the whole Mirage thing with the laser eye or whatever. Like, we're stuck in space in our arc wing, or even on a Lasset that's been crippled. The sentient's closing in, it's charging, it's about to fire its laser. And Lotus jumps in, blocks the attack, gives us time to escape, or forces the sentient to fall back. Because if it was her father, or whatever, that hurt her, I could see that giving him enough pause for all of us to get away altogether, because whether or not the other sentients care about Lotus or whatnot, or just want to see her fixed, it's clear that Burning Lotus still has very deep feelings for its daughter.
Burning Lotus.
That's what I call it. That's what I call it, because it's awesome. Very deep feelings, very close to his daughter, and does not want to see her hurt. Like he said, he will try to stop them.
But he's definitely not. He's not above letting them do it, because he's like, they consider you Riven, and they'll take you back.
I will try to. He will try
So
to
if
stop
he
them.
needs to.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, but it will give him pause, and it may just even be that he will try to stop him, but he knows he's not strong enough to, especially not now with whatever they let happen to him during the Old War. But yeah, for the time being, I think that just about covers everything we have to talk about. Anything else on the
I
Clan?
guess so.
Yeah. So
No, kind of a bending. Oh well.
yeah. Well, we'll have more next stream. We'll whether it's on the Oro or something else in between there, because with any luck, we will be getting 17.5 this week. So
Yeah, I think it's gonna be this week for sure.
they said it was this week. I'm trusting this week. It might not be Wednesday. It might not be Thursday. They probably actually don't like to do Friday anymore, do they? So, oh, whatever. Whatever it is, hopefully there will be enough information in it that we can do an entire Loreframe stream on that. Because there's a new quest in there for Atlas, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you're right. They did say he was coming from a quest.
And boss
So
fight
sweet.
from in there, so who knows? So, yeah, for the time being, we are going to sign off, and we will rejoin you next Monday, a bit later this time, and
Yeah.
talk about whatever we can talk
And
about.
hopefully this goes up on YouTube and there are no errors.
There are no errors, indeed, yes. Who knows? We'll see, and if not, hopefully the video quality will be decent enough.